Hello everyone, it's GM Max with the recap for round 13 of the FIDE candidates, penultimate round that's just been played, and man, this was a really fun round. It's too bad I wasn't up to watch it live, but at least we get to enjoy it now. So first of all, we have this game between Vidit against Abasov, and I realize, neither of these players are really in contention for first place, but still there were like 1 or 2 points to the game I wanted to share. Like this Knight BD2 is kind of a line that, about a decade or so ago was considered a, way for white just to get a little bit of a small edge in these positions. Just saying that, Knight is a little bit offside on C6 compared to, a French exchange. Because, like, with the pawns on D4, D5, you do basically have a French exchange structure, yeah? And this move at G3 was played quite a bit in some correspondence games, just with the idea that you kind of slowly improve the position, like you're able to break the pin without your pawns getting doubled as such. But it's also true that in correspondence the players, as black just played really solidly, like bishop G6, just hoover off the pieces, and it's just very hard for white to make something of his position here, because even though optically it looks a little bit better for white at this point, with the bishop coming in at E5, just very hard to really get at black's position. G7's covered, C7's covered, D5 is covered, and, even coming up with a logical pawn break for white is not the easiest task. A move like C4 is just going to weaken your position in a sense. So white builds up steadily, rook E3, A6, Queen E2, just doing a little reorganization of the pieces. Rook F5 is, I think, a nice move here, with the idea being that, let's say if white does move the knight, trying to, reroute it towards the center in this way, well, now black can simply take and, rook E5, and, again, we're kind of seeing that, white's just not really getting anywhere in this sort of position. Like, the double pawns aren't really that much of a factor, given that it's not a pawn majority for black anyway, and, the pawns are also in one pawn island as such. And if you try to unbalance it with D5, black is just going to sit on the position and, just be very, very solid here. Again, with no real weaknesses. So white goes B4, trying to make something happen on the queen side. Knight A7's a pretty good response, just stopping any B5 ideas for the moment. White played the move G4, and you can see Vidit's trying. Like, he's trying to, organize his pieces and get something happening here, but black just kept playing good moves, and that's the way that chess works. Like, if your opponent doesn't make any mistake, well, they're either going to win if you make a lot of mistakes, or if you don't make any big mistakes either, the game's just going to end in a draw. Computer is saying maybe you can try Queen A2, but I think the difference is going to be fairly marginal. But yeah, maybe you can try something like this, where like you bring the bishop back, the queen in, and maybe you have a little something here to work with. But in the game, it just stayed fairly equal the whole way through. And it ended up just shuffling and just repeating moves, kind of admitting that there's no real way for white to make progress from here. By the way, if you are enjoying this video, do make sure to leave a like and also to consider subscribing. That will allow you to, have these videos come up in your feed and continue to enjoy them more as such. I know for me at least, like, I'm subscribed to like a million YouTube channels, and it's nice to have the videos I want to watch come up first on my feed. But I digress. This next game was between Nepomniachtchi against Nakamura, and actually this one's kind of a fun topic because it features a system called the Indian Roy Lopez, where black plays bishop c5 here, after first flicking in a6, bishop a4, and then plays this up with knight g7, and actually I kind of created a course on this that will be released, when I kind of do add some of the finishing touches, let's say, but you'll find out more about that later in the year. Don't want to give away too much just now. But basically the idea of the Indian Roy Lopez is that black is making his pawn structure very flexible, where he's sort of defending the e5 pawn with pieces, and bishop kind of has a nice long diagonal. And white's a little bit better, but it's a position where you can sort of just play without too much fury and sort of outplay the opponent. And Nakamura played in a little bit of a different way, where he didn't just play the automatic d6 and, just kind of play like this sort of thing, like king h8, something like this, for example, just playing very slowly. It's one way to play it, but instead, Nakamura wanted to play it a little bit more directly, and after rook e1, he went for takes, and And his idea for not playing the obvious d6 before is that once these pieces get traded, and it would be the same thing after cd4 as well, by the way, but Nakamura's idea is he wants to play d5 in one go and fix that pawn on d4 as a potential target. And if white does push ahead with e5, this is just a absolutely gorgeous structure for black, where the piece just flood in for the attack against the white king. Of course, Nepomniachtchi's not going to fall for that. He played e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight to e4. And I mean, white is actually better in this position. Like, I mean, Nakamura's experiment probably wasn't absolutely the most successful, let's say. Move queen d8 is also a little bit passive. Maybe b6 and, kind of waiting for him to play a move like bishop b3 or rook c1 and only then play queen d8. Might well have been a preferable move order, but I guess he didn't want to allow the weakening of the c6 square and by extension, the c7 pawn. But the game saw queen d8 immediately, and this does give white some extra options. For example, a move like d5 and even just trying to bring the knight into e6 seems really quite powerful in this position. I mean, if you want to play knight c5 immediately and just make it harder for black to kind of hold on the light squares, this would also be pretty strong for white, and that was probably Nepo's best chance to win the game. Well, it's not like you're winning per se, but like it gives you the best chance to win. But after bishop c2, yeah, now black's sort of able to kind of hit back, and after b6, just knight e6 is just not as effective as it was before. Like after takes and takes, I mean, my first thought was just to go knight f4 and even just go for a counter attack in this sort of way. We're very decent counterplay for black, and white does have an IQP up at the end of the day. But white went knight d3 instead, and technically you can get away with just taking the pawn if you want to. If you're wondering why Nepo played this, he wanted to go for knight e5 and kind of make the point that his active rooks are going to be more important than the extra pawn, but Indran still thinks it's just equal. And the move that Nakamura played with bishop e7 is probably even simpler, just not giving white a glimmer of hope and just continuing to play with the active pieces. White played d5, rook a8, all pretty standard moves by both sides. c5 a nice little touch, using the fact that white is not able to effectively take on passant. And realizing that the position is basically just equal here, the players did just shuffle back and forth and just repeated moves in this way, so they wouldn't have to play it out all the way to move 40 when they kind of know the results already, in a sense. Whereas that could sound a bit wrong, but like they know that it's going to be a draw if they play it out normally, is what I mean. But yeah, let's get into some of the more interesting games that we have for the round. Where this next one, did have a little bit of an impact on the standings, because going into this round, Caruana was half a point off the lead. And this one, sees him playing his knight 6 Rosslyn that he'd prepared for the tournament. And it's true that, in his game against Vidit, he played bishop g4 and, had some big problems, as we saw in one of the earlier recaps. Such a long tournament, I've already forgotten what round it was now, but I remember it was in the first half of the tournament. Round 7, maybe, I don't know. But realizing that bishop g4 didn't work out so well for him, he played the move queen c7 instead, just trying to get the pawn to e5. White can avoid this by playing e5 himself, but it would be a very different type of pawn structure, right? Like, obviously, Caruana would have been very well prepared in these variations as well to play this very unusual kind of structure where, you can't just, let's say, intuit your way through everything, as it were. But the game went knight bd2, also a very standard move, and black gets in his e5, and like looking at these positions almost feels a bit like kind of an anti-Berlin Roy Lopez, but where your pawn is on c5 instead of c6, which is a worse version. It means white's a bit better, but there's still scope to outplay the opponent, of course. So bishop e7, knight c4, knight d7, all this is pretty standard, and I think you don't really want to let black, generally speaking, you don't really want to let them just get an f6 and just have this very harmonious setup with the the dark squared bishop complemented by the dark squared center. I mean, to be fair, you could still play like knight h4 and go f4 and probably still have some play, but this is obviously showing like what black is kind of trying to do and what white is trying to do in general in these sorts of structures. white played a move knight g5, which I do think is the most critical move, and there are a few ways that you can play it. You know, you could, after takes and takes, you could also play like bishop g5 and, you know, play out this position with the knight coming in at e6 and just trying to frustrate white's pawn breaks. But white would, I think, have a fairly safe edge. Like, it's a position I think that only white can realistically press in a situation like this, like queen g4, you know, rook b1, prepare f4 at the right moment, maybe with the move g3 first. The computer also kind of likes the idea of pushing the h pawn and just trying to create some weaknesses in black's position first before you open things up. But yeah, I like the move that Caruana played of knight f8, just sort of preparing the idea of bringing the knight towards e6, but not kind of showing your hand in a sense. I like the idea of the move queen g4 by white, just making it hard for black to castle. This is what happened in the game, by the way, of h5, queen f5, and, you know, to this point, I feel like, you know, Prague has played it pretty well and does have a little bit of an edge to work with at this point. Yeah, I had my alarm set because, like, I have a lesson later today, but yeah, let's get into the game from here, because this was actually quite a critical moment, in fact, where the things really shifted, and, you know, it's a 14-round event, right? You know, these players are, you know, best players in the world, so it makes sense. You know, people are getting tired by this stage, and, you know, that's going to, yeah, lead to sometimes the players making some mistakes that, you know, maybe they wouldn't make if it was round one of the event. Unfortunately, queen h3 just ends up being kind of a little bit too, I don't know, just a little bit too passive here. Where what white really needs to do is he really needed to play the move of f4 at this point. And okay, it is true you are sacrificing a pawn. Like, it's not a decision that you take lightly, let's say, to, you know, sack a pawn in this way. But it does actually work for white, where you can play the move e5 and, you know, you're sacking a couple of pawns, but you do get some play for it. After take, you know, white has this trick of bishop f4, and, you know, you can't take it because of the rook e1 pin, as it were. So that would be the way for white to open the position. You know, sack a pawn, but get some pretty good compensation, because the black king is still in the center, and, you know, you'd like to castle long, but that then reactivates the pin and allows white to take e5. So then, you know, black would probably have to play castles or king d8, and, you know, white would get some chances there. No, to be fair, I think even here, like, if you take... Well, I was going to say that if you take, like, queen e3, and that if white does just take the pawn back, something like this, that, you know, an ending like this is only going to be, like, a little bit better for white. Like, it'll be a little bit harder, I think, for white to get considerable winning chances when black's pieces are so active. But on the other hand, it's also true white's not forced to play this, but, you know, they can play, like, c3 and d4 instead. But, okay, I'm digressing a little bit here. Because in this position, yeah, white played the move queen h3. I mean, to be fair, if you want to play something like knight f3, it's not like the end of the world either by any means. But yeah, queen h3 just kind of misses the point of the position just a little bit, where black now gets this very nice, you know, pawn storm on the king's side, and it's subsequently very difficult for you know, for white to find a good plan, essentially. So g4, queen e3, long castles, queen e2, rook d to g8. You know, we're just preparing to push the pawns forward and attack the king. White puts knight f1 and e3, trying to cover this to some extent. But knight d4, and yeah, it's just a very tough position for white here after h3. It's kind of a funny point that the knight is so much better than their rook, like, in such a close position, that in a weird way you almost, like, don't want to rush to take the rook on e1. Like, it might actually be better just to keep the knight here and just sort of frustrate white. But I guess the reason Caruana didn't play this is he sort of felt, well, how do you break through as black in a sense? Because you don't really have f5 with the knight covering it. If you have a player like b5, you're opening up your own king. So I think I do understand, yeah, why he ended up taking the rook and just, you know, having the extra material. Still, you can kind of see the same problem where it's actually very hard for black to break through when white has got a pretty decent grip over the light squares here. But let's see how Caruana did it. I mean, a move like b6 has some logic, but maybe he was a little concerned about a move like a5 at some point opening the king. No, to be fair, you probably actually want white to kind of open up the lines for you, but yeah, king b8 was played. You know, Caruana just played it very, very patiently, and I'm aware that these maneuvering phases are maybe not necessarily the most interesting one for most people watching. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to the point where it kind of gets to being a bit more action, let's say, in the position. Because I mean, well, like at F3, this is kind of an interesting moment because yeah, if white just sits on the position, it's not so clear how you make progress. But yeah, when you play F3, it sort of means that, you know, in theory things are opening up a little bit more, but it's also still just a complete blockade on the king side. But okay, we had bishop d2. Once again, maybe the move a5 is the play here, just saying that you don't really mind if they play b6, because, well, maybe you even just play a... Obviously, I mean this exact position because it's not defended, but as like a general point, let's say if we play, I don't know, queen d8, and let's say white goes king e2 and b6, like it's sort of an interesting point. Yeah, normally you'd think that the opening of the queen side would be good for black, because you can try to, play on the a file. But the thing is, if you play rook a7, you're also allowing stuff like queen h5, and, you know, it's a case where with the h pawn, past h pawn coming up, that, you know, white's actually going to be better in a position like this. So, just sort of to say that, yeah, like, it's sort of a very deep point, but I think that in a weird way, you actually want black to play b6 in this case. But okay, understanding this in the game is not the easiest thing in the world, because it's very counterintuitive. But yeah, bishop d2, queen h5 is a nice idea by Caruana, and, you know, now black actually can, you know, try to make something work here, where, you know, only black can really win being up a full exchange, and, you know, because there's a very maneuvering phase. This is why I'm fast forwarding a little bit past the game from here. Rook b3, king a7, and yeah, I mean, at this point, maybe the best bet is just to go king f3, put the bishop on d2, and just try to make it as hard as possible for black to get in b5 here. Because in the game, once black gets in b5 after a bit more preparation, like at this point, black's just going to be up a clear exchange where you don't even really care too much about the, you know, the pawn on c5 being on here. Because you are getting a passed pawn, an outside passed pawn, your rook is coming in, and yeah, we can kind of feel how there's a bit of a problem for white now. So after bishop d8, I mean, knight c4 is probably the best try, but even then, I'm not sure if it's enough to save the game if, you know, black just insists on, you know, trading off white's rook and just getting into the white position, you know, even at the cost of a pawn. But bishop a3 was played. Once again, I kind of like this rook b7, rook b1 idea. Just get their rook off the board and, you know, get your rook active. But rook c8 was played. You know, black played a little bit slowly, which kind of allowed white to, yeah, sort of, I don't know if get back in the game is the right way to put it, but at least to not be like, you know, losing and directly losing in a sense. Because, yeah, in this situation here, you know, white has managed to get back a pawn, and, you know, it's probably actually able to draw this if he plays it perfectly. Like, say, if you play king f3, rook a2, and kind of just sit on the position. Yeah, it's not the easiest task to actually break through in this case. You know, maybe you can play something like rook a2 and, you know, sack the exchange and, you know, say you have some winning chance with the outside pass pawn and the fawn pawn. But it's not like an outright win for black by any means. The game went rook a3, bishop b4, rook a2, you know, just a little bit of shuffling continuing to happen. And maybe at this point, Prague might have been a bit concerned if he just does nothing here, that black might try to make some progress, say, put the bishop on f4 and, you know, put some pressure here. That is if white plays rook a1, to be clear, like, you might go bishop d2 and, you know, use the weakness of the bishop to your advantage and, yeah, try to do something here. Note, by the way, yeah, the bishop is under attack, so rook c4 isn't just winning a 2-mile piece for a rook. The computer also likes to move g5 and, like, sacking a pawn to, like, get, you know, to go after these pawns. But okay, this is not the easiest decision to make, just suddenly, you know, put all your eggs in one basket, as it were. The game saw the move c3, and, you know, this did allow black a very nice move of rook to c7, just with the idea that, you know, it's actually, the pieces for white are actually kind of stuck now. It's hard to actually untangle them. And the move bishop a1, yeah, was kind of accelerating the demise after the move rook to d7. Yeah, now even the d3 pawn becomes a bit of a problem, and, you know, white's attempt to create counterplay with d4 was falling a little bit short after rook c7. Very nice move by Caruana here. Knight e3, and, you know, if bishop c3, there is a knight d5 trick that we don't want to fall for, but of course Caruana's not going to fall for that. We had take, rook b3, and, you know, now the extra exchanges are really showing its weight here, especially when you have, like, the bishop and rook so passive as well. The game ended e5, take. Rook a1, nice little exchanging combination, just being able to win the knight on the next move. And white tried to make something happen with the passed pawns on the king side, but Caruana was able to neutralize it with the bishop. Of course, the bishop is a very good piece for stopping the opponent's passed pawns, and black does have a passed pawn of his own here. Like if g5 was played, black can just play like rook b2 and g6. You can take on h2 and sort of catch the other pawn in the nick of time and sort of still queen your own pawn simultaneously. So white goes rook c1. We had king b6, g5, bishop e7. King g6 is the way white tried it in the game, but you're not even really threatening king f7 because black just takes the pawn anyway here. So rook c8, rook e3, rook e8. A3 is a nice move, realizing that white is not in time to take the bishop because the pawn is just going to queen. So rook a8, the rook goes back, king ace b7, rook a5, take, and yeah, I mean, black's just up a piece for nothing, and rook a6 is a very clinical finish where Caruana realized that even though white is promoting to a queen as well, black can just play the move queen a2 and just trade queen to win the ending, so white just resigned here. Okay, let's look at the final game, and this is the one that had the biggest impact on the standings, as you might have guessed from the ordering of the games. And this was Gukesh's win against, out-of-form Firouzja. And with this win, actually, Gukesh took the outright lead in the tournament with one round to spare, being half a point ahead of Nepo Nakamura and also Caruana. But it was a little bit of a shaky game. It was almost in some ways like the reverse of their round 7 games. So let's see how it played out. Castling is these days not considered the most critical move, but it's also true that, even if you play bishop c6 or like c3, like you're not really forcing advantage whatever you play against the Berlin. It kind of just comes down to, what sort of position you want to play in a sense. And, knight d4 is an extra option that is afforded by, the fact that white didn't play the move c3 just yet. But yeah, knight d4, we had take, knight d2. And normally in this position, white plays bishop a4 and, kind of keeps the option of where you want to retreat the bishop later. But trying to surprise his opponent, Gukesh played bishop to c4 instead. It might seem at first that d5 is quite a good reply, but it's actually a little bit of a trap here. That in this case, you can go bishop b5 and, say if bishop to d7, you can just take and you can play like knight f3 and you sort of see that, black's bishop is actually very awkwardly placed. So this is the reason why you see black instead play d6 and, kind of make sure his bishop is well placed before he thinks about playing d5 in a sense. So a5, this all kind of standard theory, like a move like castles might seem natural to the uninitiated, but then white does get some pressure and it's just a little bit awkward. By playing a5 force, it kind of avoids that problem where the bishop stays on this long diagonal. And it's sort of an instructive point that you don't really want to play bishop g5 before they castle, because what will sort of happen after black flicks in these moves first is that it sort of becomes awkward to keep the pin. Like if you play bishop h4 here, you just run into a incredibly strong attack against your king. It is very, very hard to deal with. In fact, turns out black's already winning in this position. So that's why instead Gukesh played a bit differently. Maybe he felt that playing a move like a4 would just make things way too symmetrical to have any significant winning chances here. But I do think that an argument could be made for a move like bishop c2 and basically just preparing a move like d4 essentially at the right moment. But the game went knight e3, anticipating b5 and a4 ideas to some extent. But admittedly, the opening wasn't really a success for Gukesh. Here, Firouzja found a very nice move of d5. You might be wondering, well, what if white just takes the pawn? But in this case, black has this little trick of a4 that they can play, where you can't play bishop a4 because then is going to be a discovered attack on your bishop and you're going to lose a piece. But letting black just dominate the center is also pretty bad. So instead, white just keeps the tension, bishop c2, just sort of admitting he's not really better anymore. I really like Firouzja's next move of g6, just not letting white get knight f5 and the sort of attack on his king. Is a very good example of a prophylactic play by Firouzja. We had rook e1, bishop e6, and to my mind, the most normal move here is probably just to play h3 and kind of sit on the position, but I think that maybe Gukesh was a little bit concerned about a move like d4 and sort of losing a little bit of his momentum. Because here you do kind of have with sort of a poor man's King's Indian structure where your bishop is really not as nice on c2 as on g2 in a sense. And you're not really even in a position to prepare f4, especially after a move like knight h5 that just covers it quite directly. So I can understand a little bit why, Gukesh decided to surrender the center, basically trying to avoid something worse from happening here. Of course, black is doing quite well, like, almost any move is going to be decent for black here. King g7 is one way you can play it to, prepare like bishop b8, maybe some attack like this, but make sure, that the knight's defended first before you move the queen. But rook e8 was played in the game, and this does allow white to be a little bit annoying with bishop a4. Obviously, you can't keep the rook on the e-file because the knight does need to be protected here. But also rook f8, knight f1 leaves the the pawn a little bit tender on e5, let's say. So black goes e4 instead. And after e4, we had take, queen e2. Queen f4 slightly more active, but it doesn't make a big difference here, admittedly. Queen e2 was played, rook e7, knight f1, queen c7. Like, both sides are playing well, it's just a balanced position with, the imbalance in the structure. We had the move a4, again, nice little idea to, set up some tricks. Well, actually, at bishop a4, the real idea is going to be you go bishop c4 take and then threaten mate, essentially. You can always count on Firouzja to find these very tricky ideas in the game, even when he's out of form. The game went bishop e6 take. White played bishop e3, which is a little bit of a strategically double-edged decision. Just because you are allowing black to play a3 and mess up the structure a bit. But it's not a problem, though. White just played the move c4. Because if black does take, I mean, you are getting enough active play of the pieces to make up for your isolated pawns on the queen side. So it's fine. The game saw black play knight h5, trying to create some attacking chance on the king side. g3, bishop c5 is keeping the tension. White played a move of b3, which does strike me as a very logical move to just make your structure solid. But the engine maybe isn't the biggest fan of it, let's say, where it prefers to play a little bit more dynamically when open up the position, as it were. I mean, the decision might also have been motivated perhaps by the fact that, for Gukesh, I mean, it's not maybe too strong to say it's a must-win game per se, but it's definitely a game where, like, the upside of, like, winning is quite high, and, if you draw, you're probably going to end up in best, like, in a tiebreak in Rapid against Nepo and Nakamura, and, as great of a player as Gukesh is, I think it's fair to say that, like, in a Rapid playoff, Nakamura is always going to be the favorite. So, in the game, we had, rook f8. So what I'm saying with that is essentially, like, you're very much motivated, I think, in Gukesh's shoes, like, to try to win the tournament outright and to avoid a tiebreak if it's, if it's feasible as such. So here, again, like, if you play queen d2 and queen d5, you're going to equalize, but you're not really going to ever realistically win the game unless, Firouzja just self-destructs or something, which you can't necessarily count on. So rook d5, objectively it might be a bit of a mistake to, play it this way of f4 and weaken your king a little bit. But you can understand a little bit based on the tournament situation. And it actually kind of paid off in the sense that after rook knight f6, rook d2. I mean, it's not quite time trouble. It's like, very mild time trouble, let's say. And actually, as we go a bit deeper, like, the engine starts to, say, what, it's still equal anyway. So, maybe I was being a bit too critical of rook d5 even earlier. Because, black has various moves they can play, like, almost any normal move, let's say, is going to just keep the balance. But Firouzja, I guess he sort of figured, well, almost kind of, I guess, like some gamblers, like, let's just go for the win and just go for broke. And he played the move of g5, which is actually not as bad as the engine is sort of, like, initially makes out at a low depth. Like, even here, position is still okay for black, but we can sort of feel how, the f5 pawn's a bit of a weakness, and, white sort of is getting some small chances. Maybe black should go knight d7 and, not fear the move knight d5, because you do have, counterplay in response there. So black plays queen f7, king h2 just gets off that file in advance, just a good prophylaxis. Knight h5, queen f2. And despite all the previous comments, like, it's still a position where white only has a very small edge to work with, but in hands with great player, sometimes that's all you need to encourage some mistakes from the opponent. So I had rook ed1, rook h6, a little bit of shuffling happening for both sides to get to the time control, as you can see here with the clock times. So yeah, we had a little shuffle here. I mean, you could also make an argument for rook d6 and trying to make something happen along the d file, and maybe argue that some of these pawns are a little bit weak on the queen side. But then it would be a very different game. So the game saw rook g1, black played rook g6, just blocking the file. Queen h4, trying to inch in and create some little chances. I mean, it's sort of an example, like, I mentioned this theme a lot in the recaps, but it's almost like an example of a space disadvantage, where black is in some danger of being overextended here. I mean, if he plays, let's say, like, queen g6, knight e6, it's probably still just equal. Like, the weakness is probably just even themselves out here at the end of the day. Like, the pin here might look annoying, but I just don't think there's a really great way to kind of follow it up in a sense. Because queen e7 just met with rook e8, it's actually not as good as it looks for white there. But I should probably explain a bit more clearly. Like, if white does take the pawn, black has rook g8, or even queen h5. Like, this is the reason why you can't just go pawn grabbing here as white, because black's counterattack is going to be a lot stronger. Well, the game saw king h8, and white played king f2, just slowly improving the position. Rook g8 is actually a little bit of a mistake here, where black should probably just sit on the position and hope for the best. Like rook d8, queen f7, it's unpleasant psychologically, but it's not like white has a crushing move in this position. But the game saw rook g8, and yeah, here a small opportunity was missed, where it turns out that the move queen h6 is very strong here. Like, it's almost like a sort of Zugzwang light for black, where it's just very hard for black to find a move that doesn't worsen his position. Like, say you play rook f8, white can even just inch in with rook d6, knight d5, and yeah, it just becomes very hard for black to defend all his weaknesses somehow, because even his king becomes a little bit of a weakness if the knight can sort of get in a sense. But the game saw queen g5, and this did give black an opportunity where he could have, in hindsight, sacrificed the pawn and got some counterplay here and basically forced white, forced a bit strong, but kind of like prompted a trade of queen to an ending that is ultimately going to be like holding for black if we play this out all the way to the end. Then yeah, black will have enough resources to survive in this case. But in the game, queen g6 was played, and as natural as it looks to improve your structure like this, it does turn out to be actually a decisive mistake, because of the move rook d6. Hitting this pawn, and if you're wondering, well, what if black just plays knight e8? Then the move, well, I was going to say rook d7, which is quite good, but actually also rook e6 is maybe even better, where you just completely dominate their knight, and if knight c7, rook b6, and you can sort of feel how hard it is for black to defend his numerous weaknesses, that the rook can defend one, but it can't defend both at once here. So nice little kind of domination where, even if black does nothing, like rook e7 is still making it very tough for black to, defend his pawn on b7 comfortably. So, yeah, kind of a nice example of inching in these sort of endgames. The game saw rook e8, white took the free pawn on offer. Knight e6, trying to create some counterplay with knight d4. White did a good job of keeping control here, like, knight f5 is technically good, but it makes things a bit messy, whereas knight d5 just keeps your position very nice and stable, which is why I like this move that Gukesh played. Knight d4, rook b6 is a very good move, just fixing the weaknesses in place. Knight c2 maybe smacks a bit of desperation, but it's already very hard for black here. Rook b7. If you're wondering why he didn't play the move e3, turns out that after knight d4, you actually have this very cool idea of playing king d3. And if e2, then white goes knight f6, and actually kind of gives a checkmate almost in a similar spirit to Farusha's win against Gukesh earlier in the event. But the game instead saw rook e6, rook e7 just keeps the control. Of course, a knight endgame, even with the fawn pawn, like the c pawn, is just going to be faster here. The fact that you are queening with check is obviously helping quite a lot. So the game ended rook h6, c5, knight d4, king g2, just keeping it all defended, rook g6, king f2, rook h6, b4, and yeah, Black's counterplay might look a little bit scary for a moment, but you're never really getting mated just by a rook and a knight in general. And the white pass pawns being connected are just too much here. After king g8, it's b5, king f8, b6, rook g6. Yeah, I mean, black is nowhere close to a mate, and the pawn is about to queen. And therefore, Firouzja resigned here. A very, very exciting round of chess, of course, that we had at this point, where, you know, it's just quite a well-played game by Gukesh. You know, maybe the opening wasn't the most convincing, but he just kind of outplayed his opponent from a normal position after. And I mean, if you look at like the standings, I mean, Gukesh being on +4, 8.5 out of 13 is really very impressive. And I think not many people really sort of predicted it. Like kind of the, you know, predictions before the event were kind of along the lines of, you know, guys like Prague and Gukesh, you know, they're young guys will like, you know, score some wins and do all right, but probably like not going to win the event because of the lack of experience. But, you know, if you look at some players here, a lot more experience, like, you know, Caruana, you know, Nepo, Nakamura, yeah, they're doing well. Like they're on, you know, +3 and, you know, have a shot at first place here in the last round. If, you know, if Gukesh doesn't win against Nakamura with black. I mean, the two key matchups actually for last round are very, very interesting because you have basically, you know, I already mentioned the game with Gukesh's black against Nakamura, which is a, you know, must-win game for Nakamura to be in at least a tie for first place. You know, if it's a draw, then Gukesh will be a half point ahead of him. And then the other key matchup, like, you couldn't really script it better, but you basically have, you know, Caruana playing against Nepomniachtchi. I forget whether he was playing with, yeah, Caruana's white against Nepomniachtchi, I believe, in that last round game. So it's a game where, you know, it's obviously a must-win for Caruana, where Caruana needs to win just to even have a shot at a tie for first place, basically. Whereas for Nepo, yeah, if Nepo, like, it's maybe not so likely he wins with black against Caruana, let's say, but if he does win with black, you know, then it puts him in a spot where, you know, he can, he can basically make like even at least a tie for first place, let's say. But the question would be whether it's a tie with Gukesh with a draw or a tie with Nakamura if Nakamura wins. And like I said, if Gukesh wins, it doesn't matter how this game goes between Caruana and Nepo, because, yeah, basically Gukesh will have won the tournament outright then. So, very exciting final round. I mean, I said more than once in different, like, you know, lead chess chats of the broadcast tournaments that, you know, that it could be the best round of chess that you'll see in your entire life or in all of chess history. But given these last round pairings, I mean, I do think we're in for a pretty special round, and, you know, we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, it wouldn't shock me if it ends up being one of the best rounds in all of Candidates history and maybe even in all of chess history. We'll see, and yeah, in a few... Well, I'm curious to know as well, what was the most interesting game or the most sort of cool move from these games that you saw here? And let me know your prediction as well in the comments. Who do you think is going to win this tournament? You know, one round still playing and can still happen, but what is your prediction? We'll see you for the recap. It's going to be tomorrow. I'm really, really excited for that one. Probably going to be a little bit delayed because I have like some lessons, but yeah, we'll figure it out. I will see you for that one, and until then, take care.